Brazilian Senate approved far-right President Jair Bolsonaro's evangelical pick for a seat on the Supreme Court. Italy saw its first general strike in the last 7 years this Thursday as two of the three major trade unions declared an 8-hour stoppage against the proposed 2022 budget. Palestinians have protested yet another Israeli provocation as the occupying regime continues its cultural appropriation of Palestinian heritage. Hi, this is From the South. I am your news anchor, Dio Martin, from the TeleSUR studios in Havana. We begin with the news. We begin in Brazil, where the Senate approved a Presbyterian pastor for a seat on the Supreme Court in a win for far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, who had promised to appoint a terribly evangelical judge to the court. The Senate backed former Justice Minister André Mendonça 48 by 47 votes to 38, who will occupy the 11th seat of the Supreme Court in Brasilia, replacing a judge who retired in July. The appointment of Mendonça was hailed by conservatives as the court adjudicates on controversial issues such as the rights of minorities, abortion, drugs, and access to weapons. The new judge had been a member of the government since Bolsonaro came to power in January 2019 with firm support among evangelicals, a fast-growing segment in Brazil. Analysts noted that the appointment was political and represented a victory for Bolsonaro heading into the 2022 elections, as it would allow him to retain the electoral support of evangelicals and will also be seen as a sign that the president still controls the majority in the Senate when he needs it. The president-elect of Honduras, Xiomara Castro, assured on Wednesday that she will not use state resources to finance her inauguration, but will instead request donations for the organization. The president-elect emphasized that her Liberty and Refoundation Party has requested donations from the public for the event, which is scheduled to take place on January 27th and will be attended by representatives of several countries, regional organizations, and the Honduran population. Members of the political organizations backing the president-elect explained that they do not want to use state resources to finance a handover of power and also want to avoid using money from sources that are not fully transparent. The Bolivian Senate approved the 2022 state budget, which foresees increased public sector investment. After an extended debate, the bill was approved, prioritizing health, education, and production. The budget foresees an increase of 25% in public investment compared to the 2021 budget. It also estimates that economic growth will reach 5.1%. According to data from the Ministry of Economy and Public Finances, an inflation rate of 3.4% is forecast for the next year, as well as a lower deficit than projected in 2021. Tax revenues are forecast to increase by 12.1%. Similarly, revenues from public enterprise operations are projected to increase by 9.1%. The budget will now be sent to the executive branch for its subsequent enactment. And the Colombian government is not very happy with the findings of two reports that denounce human rights violations by state security forces. The reaction comes after the publication of a United Nations report, which added to another published by the Bogotá mayor's office, with both highlight abuse by security forces, including the murder of protesters. Rather than address the recommendations of these investigations, Colombian Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs Marta Lucía Ramírez said the government could not allow its institutions and the rule of law to be undermined, and asked the members of the UN office in the country not to engage in what she called political activism. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights found that police were responsible for at least 28 killings during the national strike mobilizations of this year, and security forces had perpetrated serious human rights violations, including arbitrary detentions, sexual and gender-based violence, and acts of discrimination and racism. Indonesia has begun administering COVID-19 vaccinations to children aged between 6 and 11, joining a small group of Asian nations that have started to immunize their very young population. The Ministry of Health predicted the country would need 58.7 million doses of vaccine for children aged between 6 and 11. There are currently 6.4 million doses of Sinovac shots available, with more expected in January. In the capital alone, around 1.1 million children of this age group are eligible for the vaccination, which authorities say is necessary so students can return to school safely. While Indonesia experienced one of Southeast Asia's worst outbreaks in this year, cases have flatlined in relative terms in recent months. We'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Italy saw its first general strike in the last 7 years this Thursday as 2 of the 3 major trade unions declared an 8-hour stoppage against a proposed 2022 budget. Thousands of people gathered in Rome as well as in 5 other major Italian cities to demand a change in the economic and social policies of Prime Minister Mario Draghi's government, just days ahead of Parliament's approval of a crucial budget law. The CGIL and UIL labor unions, which have a combined membership of more than 7.5 million people, said the announced budget was unsatisfactory. Unions stress that planned tax cuts will benefit higher earners and that the government has not devoted enough attention to those who were affected the most by the economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. They also condemned planned retirement rules and labor contracts.
We are contesting a reform that gives us pocket money and at the very least rewards those whose salaries are 3 to 4 times higher than a low-income worker. And we are fighting to increase the net in the pay slip starting with the lowest salaries and the lowest pensions. We do not want to divide the world of work, we want to unite it. And we are fighting for policies that are able to change the wrong laws that have been made in the last 20 years. And to finally introduce those elements of justice that make the right to work a truly enforceable and fundamental right. In this country, we need to address the issue of welfare, of a social state that is being questioned, which concerns pensions, but also with regard to the answers we should give to young people who have no pension, to the women that we talked about during the pandemic, but who have been completely forgotten.
An Ivory Coast president received his Ethiopian counterpart on Thursday on an official visit to the country. President Sahle-Work Zewde received a warm welcome by her host Alassane Ouattara on arrival. Zewde said the situation in Ethiopia is stabilizing and that they will soon have a national dialogue to put an end to the conflict. The president's visit seeks to find ways to strengthen the bilateral relations between Ethiopia and Ivory Coast. She was also set to meet the Ethiopian community as well as officials of the African Development Bank in the country. Tunisian lawyers and rights activists lodged an appeal on Thursday against the imprisonment of 2 men as part of the efforts they hope can decriminalize homosexuality in the country. Under the North African country's criminal code, those found guilty of consensual same-sex acts can be punished with up to 3 years in prison. The men concerned, who were sentenced to a year in prison since a lower court rejected their first appeal in July 2020, are appealing to the country's top court to overturn a cruel sentence that violates international standards, according to their lawyer. The appeal could take months, but if it succeeds, it could create a legal precedent as well as reverse their sentence. The goal is to do away with Article 230, the section of the Penal Code dating back to French colonial times, which outlaws homosexual acts. Some 150 people are currently in Tunisian prisons under the article.
Today we filed the appeal in the case of the young men from CAF. Today we have the opportunity to defend the LGBTB community, to oppose the Article 230. But our concern is not only that. Our concern is the article which is unconstitutional and goes against the international standards that Tunisia has signed.
I may be the eternal optimist, actually. I think that, yes, there is hope. Already this case, the fact that we have arrived at the Court of Cassation, it will open a debate, and especially a legal debate, and a serious debate on the question. I always believe in passionate debates.
Well, Tunisia and Algeria signed 27 bilateral agreements on Thursday in the presence of their presidents in Tunis. Tunisian President Kais Saied and his Algerian counterpart Abdelmajid Tebboune presided over the signing ceremony of the partnership agreements concerning a wide range of areas including justice, public institutions, communication, media, industry and small and medium-sized enterprises, environment, foreign trade, culture, religious affairs, energy, vocational training, fishing, employment, childhood, the elderly, young people, sports, education and health, according to a statement by the Tunisian presidency. During a joint press conference, the two presidents indicated the convergence of respective visions on a number of regional and international issues, including the situation in Libya. Tebboune made a two-day official visit to Tunisia and discussed ways to strengthen bilateral ties. The Syrian government and multiple international analysts announced that the Cooperation Council of the Gulf monarchies is attempting to erode the strategic relationship between Syria and Iran by accusing Tehran of interference. Our correspondent Hisham News has the story.
The Cooperation Council of the Gulf oil monarchies, at the conclusion of its 42nd summit in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday, December 14, reaffirmed the commitment to the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria. However, the Council said it was against regional interference in the internal affairs of Damascus, which, in its opinion, seeks to provoke a demographic change in the Arab country. This was an indirect aim at Iran, seeking to provoke a rift between Damascus and its ally Tehran, according to experts. The latest talks that took place between the Gulf monarchies and Iran did not produce the results expected by the Gulf Cooperation Council states, which is why they are trying to exert political pressure on the Persian nation by issuing a communique pointing to Iran as an interfering force seeking to provoke a demographic change in Syria, and thus trying to mobilize the Arab and Syrian people of Sunni religion tendency, in particular against Iran. At the same time, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, defended before the cross-border entry of humanitarian aid into Syria, the Security Council, without the approval of Damascus, a mechanism that both government and citizens condemn, as in addition to violating the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country, it is used to provide logistical, military and financial support to terrorist gangs and Kurdish separatist militias under the false excuse of guaranteeing necessities to Syrians. The Secretary General of the United Nations, instead of acting in the service of agendas of countries hostile to Syria, should have clarified the reason why Syria needs humanitarian aid and denounce that the countries that impose this terrorist war on Syria are the ones who are really responsible for starving the Syrian people. We really hope that he would have the courage to denounce these states and not to violate international law with this statement. Meanwhile, although open to the normalization of relations with other Arab nations, Damascus rejects any pretension that these rapprochements be in exchange for distancing from its allies of the resistance bloc, including Iran, a position endorsed by the Syrian people who in turn denounce the use of the United Nations as a platform to politicize their humanitarian case in the service of Western plans against their country.
Hisham News, TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
We have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Hi, welcome back. Palestinians have protested yet another Israeli act of provocation, this time related to the theft of their cultural heritage after Miss Universe candidates, including Ms. Israel, wore traditional Palestinian dress in the event held in the occupying state. Social media posts by contestants who had been urged to boycott the event given the Israeli regime's crimes against Palestine showed them wearing Palestinian embroidered dresses and preparing various typical Palestinian dishes as they commented that they were experiencing the Israeli culture. The pictures circulated at the conclusion of a visit organized by the Miss Universe contest to several Israeli-occupied Palestinian areas, which began in occupied Jerusalem. Protests were held to reject the blatant act of cultural appropriation at the Al-Azhar University in Gaza City, where protesters insisted that their national identity should be respected.
saw Miss Israel wearing our dress, which is our heritage, and we must oppose it. The Palestinian heritage is ours, not theirs. We should be happy, because this confirms to the world that the occupation is stealing our heritage, and that act is a sign of weakness from the occupation. They cannot do anything, so they imitate us, and the Palestinian heritage remains. Today we came here to prove to the world that the Palestinian dress is a symbol of every Palestinian, and this dress represents only Palestine, and no one else has a right to steal our heritage.
Bangladesh on Thursday marked 50 years since its independence from Pakistan by hosting a military parade with the Indian president as a guest of honor. On December 16, 1971, Pakistani soldiers surrendered to a joint India-Bangladesh force, formally making Bangladesh a new nation under the leadership of independence leader Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the father of current Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The war began on March 26 and continued for 9 months before victory was declared in December, aided by India under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Thursday's celebrations were attended by Indian President Ram Nath Kovind, who was on a 2-day visit to the country. After arriving on Wednesday, Kovind held discussions with Bangladeshi President Abdul Hamid on issues of interest, including connectivity and trade, cooperation in the fight against COVID-19, and development partnerships. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang held talks with representatives of the world's top 500 corporations, noting China's efforts to continue deepening reform and improve the business environment for both domestic and foreign companies. Addressing a video dialogue with the Global CEO Council in Beijing, the Premier noted that China was focusing efforts on stabilizing the economy and offered big business potential as the world's largest developing country and developing market. Li and leaders of nearly 30 Fortune Global 500 corporations had in-depth discussions on such topics as innovative development, green and low-carbon transition, and new opportunities for overseas companies to develop in China. Meanwhile, attending entrepreneurs appreciated China's support for foreign companies operating in the country to enable them to maintain normal operations during the pandemic. After a year in which China has worked more on risk prevention and support for recovery, the country's key policymakers are now looking to 2022 to focus on stability and keeping economic growth within a reasonable range to meet the nation's goals. More details in the following report by our correspondent Iransi Peraza.
Stability was undoubtedly the most important and repeated word at China's recent Central Economic World Conference, where the country's leaders set out the economic agenda for the coming year, after a 2021 in which they were committed to controlling risks and boosting the recovery. China will focus on stabilizing the economy and keeping growth within a reasonable range in 2022, according to an official statement from the conference, which added that the country will continue to implement a prudent monetary policy and proactive fiscal measures. Beijing also assures that it will take measures to boost demand, maintain industrial production and exports, support markets entities, and ensure an orderly shift to the domestic market, based on the new model in which China leaders have pinned their hopes for the nation's future development.
China's central government has assessed the domestic and international situation as well as the stages of domestic development and has designed the strategy for the coming year, which is to prioritize stability. This is to ensure that development in the coming years is steady, which will help the economy grow within a rational range and keep society in a stable state. These are the key guarantees to ensure that the great ship of China's economy can break through the waves and sail forward.
The world's second largest economy faces multiple challenges heading into 2022 due to problems in the real estate sector, shrinking demand and supply, and tight pandemic restrictions that have affected consumer spending. In this regard, the country's policymakers are committed to measures that will help maintain stability and achieve economic growth of more than 5% next year. However, despite all these challenges, experts defend the drive and perseverance of the Chinese economy, which remains one of the few to grow, which is important news for the long-awaited international economic recovery. While international financial agencies believe that China could grow by up to 8% in 2022, the authorities believe that a target of around 5% is commensurate with needs, leaves some room for maneuver and would allow all parties to focus on promoting reforms and innovation.
And thousands of people in the Philippines fled their homes and beachfront resorts as Super Typhoon Rai slammed into the country on Thursday. More than 90,000 people sought emergency shelter as the storm charged across the Pacific Ocean, disaster agency said. Rai is the strongest storm to hit the disaster-prone archipelago this year. It was packing maximum sustained winds of 195 kilometers an hour as it made landfall on the southern island of Siargao, according to the state weather forecaster. The heavy winds tore off roofs and brought down buildings, while life-threatening flooding was reported in low-lying coastal areas. Scientists have long warned that typhoons are becoming more powerful and strengthening more rapidly as the world becomes warmer because of climate change. We've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at TeleSUR English. You can also follow us on social media for the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Dio Martin. Thanks for watching.